They found her at dawn, sitting in the center of what used to be a war zone. Alone. Silent. Her rifle still warm in her hands. The enemy? Gone. All of them. No reinforcements had come. No backup had arrived. Just her, and a story that would rewrite everything the military thought they knew about warfare. Welcome to Quiet Tales Studio, where hidden strength changes everything. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching this from? And what's the most powerful story of courage you've ever witnessed? Now, let's uncover what really happened that night when one soldier rewrote the rules of war. The metallic click of the bolt sliding home echoed through the armory. Amber Vale wiped the last trace of carbon from her M4's receiver, then froze as static crackled from the radio mounted on the wall. A brief transmission meant for someone else slipped through before silence returned. Casualty confirmed. Staff Sergeant Morrison, KIA at Forward Operating Base Sentinel. Ambush during morning patrol. Her finger stopped mid-motion. Morrison, the gruff veteran who'd taught her to field strip a machine gun blindfolded. Who'd slipped her an extra energy bar when she'd missed chow. Who'd called her kid with something that almost sounded like pride. Amber blinked hard, but the sting behind her eyes spread faster than she could contain it. A single tear traced down her cheek, cutting through the thin layer of dust on her face. Someone coughed behind her. She didn't turn around. Didn't acknowledge the two soldiers walking past. But she heard them just fine. Jesus, here we go again, one muttered under his breath. Crybaby Vale strikes again, the other whispered, barely containing a snicker. Remember last week when the coffee machine broke? Same damn show. Neither stayed to watch what happened next. Amber stood slowly, walked to the firing line, and picked up her carbine. 15 rounds. 15 hits. One after another. No hesitation, no misses. The paper target at 100 meters had no center left when she finished. Her stance had been flawless. Her breathing controlled. Her grip rock-steady. But all they would remember were the tears. She'd been hearing it for 3 months now. Crybaby! It had started as a joke. Now it followed her like a shadow she couldn't shake. Her official performance reviews described her as technically exceptional, but emotionally volatile. The unofficial rumors were harsher. Too soft, too unstable, a liability waiting to happen. None of them knew what she really saw, what she sensed. At Full B Sentinel, Amber wasn't just another logistics specialist with expert marksmanship scores. She was something else, something they couldn't name. And because they couldn't name it, they feared it. She'd walked into the mess tent once, seconds before a fistfight erupted between two exhausted soldiers over a stolen protein bar. She'd pulled one aside, cracked a joke about his mismatched socks, and diffused the entire situation. No one realized what she'd done. 2 weeks later, she'd intercepted a young private who was shaking, silent, gripping the edge of his cot so hard his knuckles had turned white. Evacuation gone wrong. He hadn't spoken, just stared. Then walked out. After that, his expectations had narrowed like a closing door. Now she was the best marksman on base, and the least trusted. They kept her on supply runs, equipment checks, radio monitoring. Safe zones where nobody had to rely on her judgment under fire. The intelligence briefing came at 0600 hours, delivered with the flat efficiency of a weather report. Satellite imagery confirms increased enemy movement across the northern ridge system, the intelligence officer droned. Pattern suggests coordinated positioning for potential assault. All units advised to maintain heightened alert status. Standard stuff. But Amber felt something else. A subtle shift in the room's energy that had nothing to do with the words being spoken. She watched Martinez fidget with his pen. Noticed how Reed kept glancing toward the exit. Saw the way Sullivan's jaw tightened when the officer mentioned assault. They were scared. Not battlefield scared. That was normal, healthy even. This was deeper. The kind of fear that came from feeling trapped. After the briefing, Amber walked to the abandoned communications bunker she'd been using as her private workspace. Inside, spread across a folding table, were her real projects. Hand-drawn maps overlaid with colored markers, psychological profiles written in cramped handwriting, audio equipment she'd quietly requisitioned over the past month. Her empathy grid, she called it privately, not just tactical positions, but emotional pressure points. Places where fear would concentrate, angles that would create confusion, terrain that would feel wrong to an advancing force. She picked up her radio and tuned to the enemy's frequency, a trick Morrison had taught her. The chatter was sporadic, coded, but she'd been listening long enough to recognize patterns. What she heard made her blood run cold. They weren't planning a probe or a raid. They were planning to wipe FOB Sentinel off the map. That afternoon, she knocked on Colonel Reeves' office door. "Sir, I need to brief you on a tactical assessment." "A tactical assessment?" His eyebrows rose. "Your logistics, soldier. Your assessment is whether we have enough bullets and MREs." "Sir, I've been monitoring enemy communications. They're planning a full assault, and our current defensive positions will—" "Stop!" Reeves held up a hand. "You've been monitoring enemy communications. On whose authority?" "Sir, Staff Sergeant Morrison taught me basic signals intelligence before he was killed. I've been using that training to—" "Morrison's dead, Vale, and he wasn't authorized to teach you SIGINT procedures." Reeves leaned back in his chair. "What you're describing sounds like a specialist making assumptions way outside her expertise." Amber reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded map, placing it on his desk. "Sir, this shows predicted approach routes, psychological pressure points, and tactical vulnerabilities in our current defense plan." Reeves glanced at the map for exactly 3 seconds before pushing it back toward her. "Vale, your job is to count supplies and maintain equipment. That's it. Strategic planning is for officers. Intelligence analysis is for trained specialists. And battlefield psychology, well, that's for people who can keep their emotions in check." "Dismissed, soldier." Amber folded the map and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "Colonel, when they come, and they will come, I hope someone's listening to more than just the official channels." That night, Amber sat alone in the communications bunker, surrounded by the tools of a war only she seemed to see coming. Her modified radio crackled with intercepted chatter. Tonight, there was something different in the enemy transmissions. A finality. A sense of pieces moving into their final positions. She picked up her rifle and began a methodical inspection. Then she reached for her notebook and reviewed her plans one final time. If the attack came from the northeast ridge, as she predicted, traditional military doctrine would funnel her unit into a prepared killing zone. But there was another way. She wouldn't fight them with superior firepower. She didn't have it. She wouldn't match their numbers. Impossible. Instead, she would do what she'd always done best. Read them, understand them, and use their own psychology against them. The radio crackled again. "All units, final positions, dawn assault confirmed, no survivors." Amber closed her notebook and whispered to the empty bunker. "If I'm wrong about this, none of it matters. But if I'm right, they'll never see me coming." At 0547 hours, the first mortar round slammed into FOB Sentinel's western perimeter, shattering the pre-dawn quiet with a burst of fire and flying debris. The explosion shook the ground hard enough to topple equipment racks in the supply depot. Amber dropped instinctively, her ears ringing as fragments peppered the wall behind her. Within seconds, the base alarm shrieked to life. She grabbed her rifle and bolted outside. From her position near the depot, she could see movement. Dozens of figures cresting the northern ridge, spread in tactical formation. Not a random attack. This was coordinated, professional, and it was already penetrating their perimeter. Enemy small arms fire erupted from the eastern approach, sharp, controlled bursts. She counted at least 4 machine gun positions and 2 squads of riflemen providing cover. Then she saw the pattern she'd predicted. They weren't trying to take the base. They were herding the defenders, pushing them toward the southern evacuation route, toward the narrow canyon with no cover and limited escape routes. A killing funnel. She sprinted toward the command post, heart pounding, ducking under incoming fire that snapped past her head. Inside the CP, Colonel Reeves was already shouting orders, pointing at maps while radio operators scrambled to respond. "Evacuation Protocol Delta," he barked. "Move all non-essential personnel to the southern pass. Alpha and Bravo teams provide covering fire. We're moving in 15 minutes." Amber stepped forward without hesitation. "Sir, you can't send them south. That route's compromised. They're driving us there intentionally." Reeves barely glanced at her. "Vale, not now." "Sir, they're not attacking to hold ground. They're forcing a retreat into a kill zone. The ridge above that pass has overlapping fields of fire. I know because I've mapped it." Reeves turned fully now, his face flushed with stress and anger. "Unless you've got a drone overhead that I don't know about, you're guessing. And this is real combat, not your notebook fantasies." A massive explosion rocked the building as another mortar found its mark. Ceiling dust rained down. Through the chaos, Sergeant Knox burst through the door, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "They've breached the eastern gate," he shouted, stumbling. At least 20 pushed through with heavy weapons. Amber caught him before he collapsed. "Knox, stay with me. How many total?" He gritted his teeth, hand clutching her vest. "Saw the pattern you warned about," he whispered hoarsely. "You were right. Should have listened sooner." He coughed, blood speckling his lips. "But it's too damn late now." Medics pulled him away toward the aid station. Amber stood frozen. Not from fear, but from the terrible clarity of watching her worst predictions unfold, like a nightmare blueprint. The radio blared again. "Command, this is Watchtower 3. We've got movement across the entire western face. Estimate 40+ heavily armed hostiles. You've got maybe 20 minutes before they close the perimeter." Reeves looked at his remaining staff, then at the growing chaos outside. His face had gone pale. He knew they were trapped. Amber stepped forward. "Sir, I'm staying behind," he blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm going to hold the base," she said calmly. "Alone." Someone laughed bitterly from the corner. Another cursed under his breath. Reeves stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Vale, this isn't a movie. You can't stop 60 fighters by yourself." "I'm not going to fight them conventionally," she said. "I'm going to confuse them, delay them. Make them think this base is still fully defended. You've seen my training scores. You know what I'm capable of." "What I've seen," Reeves said coldly, "is a soldier who breaks down during briefings and thinks emotions belong in a war room." Amber didn't flinch. "I'm not asking permission, sir. I'm telling you this is what I've prepared for. You trained your soldiers to shoot straight. I trained myself to fight smarter." Reeves stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you do this and die, I'll have to write that report. Your name, your failure." "If I don't do this," she replied, "we all die anyway." The fire in her eyes wasn't anger, it was conviction. For the first time in months, he looked at her and saw no tears, only steel. The radio crackled again. "Perimeter collapsing on multiple fronts. No air support available. Estimated reinforcement arrival 6 hours minimum." Reeves' jaw clenched. He stepped aside without a word. Amber nodded once and headed for the door. As she passed the aid station, Knox reached out from his stretcher and caught her wrist. "I know what you're about to do," he murmured. "Make it count." She pressed her forehead gently to his. "I will." She gathered her equipment: rifle, 5 magazines, her notebook, and the audio gear from her bunker. Her boots echoed through the emptying corridors as the last evacuation teams moved toward the southern trail. When she emerged at the northern observation post, the sun was climbing behind the ridges, casting long shadows across the valley. 60 enemies, maybe more, and she was alone. She looked out at the horizon, then activated her earpiece, tuned to intercept enemy communications. Every breath slowed. This wasn't a suicide mission. It was a strategy. She wasn't betting on firepower, she was betting on fear. At 0630 hours, silence blanketed FOB Sentinel. Smoke curled from the shattered perimeter walls and ash drifted across the compound like gray snow. But inside the wreckage, behind carefully positioned equipment and cleverly rigged deceptions, Amber Vale took her first position and whispered into a live microphone. "Alpha Team, maintain overwatch. "Bravo team, hold southern flank." Her voice was calm, measured. The words weren't meant for allies. They were meant for the enemy listening on captured frequencies. From the ridgeline, opposing scouts crouched behind rocks, trying to assess movement within the base. Every 7 minutes, a different shot cracked through the stillness, from different windows, different towers, different angles. Some were deliberate misses designed to reveal positions. Others were precise enough to force heads down and disrupt movement patterns. Amber rotated between 8 prepared firing positions. Each had its own personality. The eastern tower fired in controlled pairs, professional and methodical. The communications bunker sent wild, suppressive bursts. The supply depot fired single shots every 5 minutes exactly, like clockwork. She wasn't just defending the base. She was performing an entire garrison. Meanwhile, her laptop ran continuous loops of fabricated radio chatter through speakers hidden across the compound. Overlapping voices created the illusion of coordinated defense. Contact left, shifting fire. Sniper teams in position. I have eyes on the northern approach. Medical, we need evac at checkpoint 7. Air support inbound, ETA 15 minutes. From outside, it sounded like a base, under full defensive coordination. To Amber, it sounded like theater. By the end of the second hour, she had fired 43 rounds from 6 locations, scoring only 7 confirmed hits. But the real damage wasn't in casualties. It was in the hesitation building inside the enemy force. At 0800, she intercepted a transmission. Still no clear count on defenders, multiple shooters confirmed, possible reinforcement already arrived. Recommend cautious advance. Amber crouched behind sandbags, wiping sweat from her forehead. She allowed herself a brief smile, then kept moving. By hour 3, exhaustion was gnawing at her legs. Every sprint between positions stole another breath. Her shoulder ached from recoil. Her voice was hoarse from whispering fake commands. But she pressed on. At 0915, she activated a secondary audio loop, this one designed specifically for enemy ears. She broadcasted on multiple frequencies with artificial static. Airstrike authorized. Grid coordinates confirmed. All units prepare for close air support in 30 minutes. She transmitted it twice, then switched to a different frequency and added, "Sniper teams report 40+ targets in the open, requesting permission to engage." On the enemy side, confusion deepened. Her intercepted communications caught rising tension. "You hear that? They've got air support coming. And how many snipers do they have?" Command says take the base before noon, no retreat. Command isn't getting shot at by ghosts. Another hour passed. She wept once. Quietly, a single sob that escaped while reloading behind the destroyed communications array. Her hands trembled briefly. Her cheek was stained with dirt and gun oil. But there were no tears of fear now, only the exhaustion of maintaining an impossible deception. At 10:30, the tipping point came. A barrage of rocket-propelled grenades hit the western wall in sequence. Dust clouded her vision as she crawled across gravel, watching through the smoke as at least 30 fighters charged the perimeter in a coordinated assault. They weren't being subtle anymore, they were betting everything on overwhelming force. Amber retreated to her most fortified position, the reinforced bunker beneath the eastern ammunition depot. From there, she had a narrow view of the central courtyard and complete control of her deception equipment. She didn't panic, she waited. And then she let the enemy walk into her psychological map. Her notebook hadn't just charted defensive positions. It had identified where attackers would feel most vulnerable, where shadows created false depth perception, where cover looked solid but wasn't, where the acoustics would amplify sound and create disorientation. They moved into it exactly as she'd predicted. She opened fire, silent, precise, methodical, 3 shots, 3 targets down. Then she activated a rigged spotlight, projecting the silhouette of a soldier against the smoke. Just a mannequin on a pulley system, but it drew immediate fire, revealing multiple muzzle flashes. She adjusted her aim and dropped 2 more attackers. Chaos erupted. The assault force splintered, some diving for cover, others trying to regroup behind a destroyed vehicle. That's when she saw him, the field commander, distinguished by his different equipment and the way others looked to him for direction. Amber held her breath, leading her target by 2 inches. When he turned to shout an order, crack, he dropped instantly. Enemy communications exploded. "Commander down! Repeat, Commander is down!" She didn't wait. She triggered her most elaborate deception yet, overlapping audio tracks that simulated reinforcements arriving from multiple directions. Reinforcements engaging from the north. 2nd platoon moving to flank positions. "We have them surrounded." She added a final layer, a deep, amplified voice over the base's PA system. "Enemy forces, you are surrounded. Surrender immediately or face annihilation." It was a recording she'd made weeks ago, pitch-shifted and processed to sound like multiple speakers. Panic took hold. The enemy force fragmented completely. Some retreated toward the ridgeline. Others fired wildly into shadows, hitting nothing but empty buildings and abandoned equipment. By hour 6, half the attacking force had either been eliminated or had withdrawn to the outer perimeter. The remainder was scattered, disorganized, and convinced they were facing a much larger defending force. She didn't pursue, she haunted. From hidden positions, she played audio loops of footsteps, radio chatter, and weapon sounds. Every 20 minutes, she fired a single shot from a new location, just enough to remind them that someone was still watching, still waiting. At 11:45, she heard the transmission she'd been hoping for. "This is a trap. Full defensive positions. Multiple sniper teams. Request immediate withdrawal authorization." And they received it. The last figures disappeared into the ravine, dragging wounded with them and leaving equipment behind. She didn't celebrate. She collapsed behind a concrete barrier, her chest rising in ragged gasps. Her lips were cracked, her fingers bruised and bleeding. The sun was directly overhead now, and the world had gone quiet except for the distant rumble of approaching aircraft. She sat up slowly, blinking toward the horizon. 3 helicopters appeared, Black Hawks banking wide over the valley, casting shadows across the abandoned battlefield. She grabbed her radio with shaking hands and transmitted on the emergency frequency. "FOB Sentinel secure. Hostile force neutralized." She paused, closed her eyes and whispered, "Defending force, 1." The helicopter touched down as the sun reached its zenith, rotor wash scattering debris across the scarred compound. Colonel Reeves stepped onto the ground, his boots crunching over spent shell casings and fragments of destroyed equipment. He surveyed the scene, abandoned enemy weapons, blood trails leading away from the base, the evidence of a battle that should have been a massacre. And then he saw her. Amber Vale sat propped against a blast wall, rifle across her lap, face streaked with dirt and dried blood. Her uniform was torn, her hands bandaged with field dressings. But her eyes were open, alert, focused. She didn't salute, didn't stand, she just looked at him. For the first time in his military career, Reeves didn't see a subordinate. He saw something else entirely, something he'd failed to recognize before. He walked toward her slowly. Around them, the rescue team moved with hushed efficiency, as if witnessing something sacred. Reeves stopped a few feet away and removed his helmet. "Vale," he said quietly, "I was wrong." She didn't smile or gloat. She nodded barely. "It's all right, sir. As long as you're listening now." 3 days later, in a secure briefing room at Central Command, a special session was convened. Classified. Urgent. On the screen behind the podium was a tactical overlay of Sentinel's defense. Red indicators showing enemy positions, blue markers representing defensive assets. Only one blue marker remained by the end. Amber stood beside the podium in a clean dress uniform, her arm still in a sling. When she spoke, her voice carried the same quiet authority it had held during those impossible hours. "This is the psychological battlefield map I developed over 3 weeks of observation," she began, pointing to hand-drawn annotations unlike anything the analysts had seen. "It doesn't just chart terrain and lines of sight. It charts fear, hesitation, and predictable emotional responses under stress." She clicked to the next slide. more detailed annotations showing acoustic zones, visual deception points, and psychological pressure areas. Each position was chosen not just for tactical advantage but for its psychological impact. Every shot was calculated not just for accuracy but for the doubt it would create. A murmur moved through the room. General Patterson leaned forward. "Who developed these psychological warfare techniques?" Amber met his eyes steadily. "No one taught me, sir," I observed. "I listened. And most importantly, I refused to see the enemy as faceless threats. I saw them as people with fears, doubts, and breaking points. That's how I knew what would stop them." Silence fell, not from awe, but from the realization that they'd been blind to capabilities that had been there all along. After the briefing, Reeves found her alone in the corridor. No rank structure, no military bearing, just a man trying to say what should have been said months ago. "I judged you from the first day," he said, "because you cried during briefings, because you seemed too soft for combat, because you didn't fit my idea of what a warrior looked like." He paused, struggling with words. "What you did at Sentinel, I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen the aftermath. You didn't just hold that base, you redefined what defense means." Amber waited, sensing more. "Will this change how we evaluate soldiers?" she asked finally. Reeves didn't hesitate. "It'll change everything. No more dismissing emotional intelligence as weakness. No more assuming empathy is incompatible with combat effectiveness." He straightened. "If someone can read a battlefield the way you do, they're not just combat ready, they're force multipliers." 6 months later, the auditorium at the Advanced Tactical Training Center was packed. Special operations candidates, intelligence analysts, and senior officers filled every seat. On stage, Amber walked to the podium carrying the same stained notebook she'd used at Sentinel. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and confident. "My name is Amber Vale. I was once labeled unfit for combat, relegated to supply duties, and considered an emotional liability." She paused, letting the words settle over the silent audience. "But I stand here today not because I shot more accurately than anyone else, not because I shouted louder orders, but because I learned to listen deeper, observe longer, and understand that emotion isn't weakness in warfare, it's leverage." A young officer raised her hand. "Ma'am, what kept you going when everyone doubted you?" Amber considered the question carefully. "I wanted to quit," she said honestly. "I wanted to burn this notebook, leave the military, and prove everyone right about me being too soft." She placed the notebook on the podium gently. "But then I realized that if I didn't stand up for what I could see, what I knew to be true, then no one else would. My instructors taught me to fight with controlled aggression and superior firepower." She lifted her gaze, steady and unwavering. "Today I'm here to teach you how to fight with understanding, empathy, and the unshakable belief that knowing your enemy's heart is just as powerful as knowing their position." In the breathless silence that followed, she said finally, "That is the real strength." The applause began slowly, then built to something more than approval. It was recognition. Recognition that they were witnessing not just a new kind of soldier, but a new understanding of what strength could be.